الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue with the book of الترغيب والترهيب by Imam al-Mudhari rahimahullah, and we're still in Kitab al-Buyu'. The hadith in the Kitab al-Buyu' from الترغيب والترهيب, and still in the chapter of الترغيب في الاقتصاد في طلب الرزق والإجمال فيه وما جاء في ذم الحرص وحب المال. These are principles in the way that we deal with rizq and provisions that we get to know from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Are human beings, they know what does it mean to have money and to work and to earn, but we have things that govern our lives. And that is through the wahy that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this chapter, as we heard it many times before, is to be encouraged and the reward in being moderate, in seeking provisions, and the meaning of al-iqtisad. Two things, if it's correct to make it easy for us to understand. One of which is to stay away from the haram, period. No excuse whatsoever to be close to the haram. And the second thing is not to indulge or to seek halal provisions in an extreme way that would make the person overlook other rights in our life. The rights in our life, for example, to our family, is not just to feed them, but to have a shelter for them. There are more rights than this. To guard their religion, to teach them the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be with them sometimes. So if a person is constantly seeking provisions and taking excuse in that, this is not the moderation in it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Razzaq. And what came also with regards to condemning the greed and the extreme love, which is already in the nature of the human beings, that would take him to a level where he transgressed the limits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set for us. And it's all a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and part of which is to know the means versus the goal. The goal is to establish the ubudiyya to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna anzalna al-mal li'iqam as-salah. This hadith in Musnad Imam Ahmad, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, we brought down al-mal, money and anything that has value, to establish the salah. This is what it's for, not the opposite. So if the seeking the provisions makes a person does not establish the salah, does not establish the deen, what's the goodness in it? It's evil in itself. نعم المال الصالح للرجل الصالح. What a beautiful thing. نعمة is أسلوب مدح, praising the righteous wealth to the righteous man. And as mentioned before, it's two variables here. One is missing, then it's corruption. So the wealth has to be righteous from halal sources and moderation and so on. And the human being, that man has to be righteous. If the money is halal, but the man is corrupted, he would spend it in spreading corruption on the face of earth. If he is righteous, but the money is haram, this is all suht. This is hellfire that he is getting into himself. And of course, it won't work. If he's righteous, that means he's not going to be someone that is taking haram money on his own self. So mentioned many of the hadith as we heard, and that one of which is the last one that we mentioned is that if you flee away from your rizq, it will get you. So relax. This is what it means by ajmilu fi talab. Take it easy on yourself. Why? Because the rizq comes to you like death. No one will escape death. So the same thing, no one will escape. لا يفر أحد من رزقه. No one will escape from his rizq. Work physically, but your heart is content because you will get what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed for you. Some of these hadith in the same chapter, the hadith of Ibn Umar رضي الله عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم رأى تمرة عائرة فأخذها فناولها سائلا فقال أما أنك لو لم تأتها لأتتك. So the hadith of Ibn Umar رضي الله عنهما, that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he saw a date عائرة, or it depends on the nation, some said عاثرة, meaning is just one piece of date that is on the ground like this, no owner to it. Just a piece of date is insignificant. So he took it and he gave it to a sa'il, someone that was asking, a beggar, someone is in need. And he said to him, if you didn't come to it, if you did not come to this date, it would have came to you. That means after he got it, so this is his rizq. So it was meant for this date to be for that individual. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already decreed it. If you didn't come to it, it would have came to you. Like one of the early generations of Islam, this is how they used to reflect over things. Traveling, and he rested in a place, he got his food out, and he spread it out, and he was eating, and an animal came from the desert and took a piece and ran. And he smiled and he reflected upon the rizq of Allah. He looked at it from what perspective? He said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent me out from my place to come here for the rizq of this animal. So this is how the rizq is. It's so complex that we do not even comprehend it. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Razzaq, this is one of the names of Allah, and the attribute of it, rizq, to reach each and every one of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not just the human beings, the smallest creation of Allah and the biggest, everyone. And since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, nothing is the like of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So no one can ever comprehend this attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore the human beings are left by nothing but to be in that state of submission to Allah. And that's why when someone is worried about it and making all kinds of concerns, this is a sign of the weak iman, of course, and not being in his even sound mind, because it's beyond your capacity, the complexity of it, that you cannot even as a human being make that decision for yourself. You just take the means, yes, and you think and you plan and you use what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you, but your heart is content clearly that everything is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, one more hadith, inshallah ta'ala, and the chapter has many of them, which is a sound hadith reported by Imam Ahmad and others. حديث أبي الدرداء رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ما طلعت شمس قط إلا بعث بجنبتيها ملكان يناديان. There's no sun that ever risen unless both sides of it, two angels are being sent to call. يسمعان أهل الأرض إلا الثقلين. All of the people or all of the dwellers of the earth can hear except الثقلين, meaning the ins and the jinn. They are the only two that do not hear the call of the angels. يا أيها الناس, O people, هلموا إلى ربكم فإنما قل وكفى خير مما كثر وألهى. هلموا إلى ربكم. هلموا, that means come on, come closer to your Lord. Because indeed, ما قل وكفى, what's less but sufficient, is better than مما كثر وألهى, better than what's in abundance but distract you and deviate you away from your benefits and what's good for you. And this part of the hadith is also, some of the early generations of Islam would say it in their khutbah. إن مما قل وكفى خير مما كثر وألهى. To say less but it's sufficient is better than to keep talking for a long time and it's distracting the people. So this is in general, not in speech, but in general. The angels would say that. ولا آبت شمس قط إلا بعث بجنبتيها ملكان يناديان. And there is no sun that would set whatsoever unless two angels are sent by its two sides to call. يسمعان أهل الأرض إلا الثقلين. They make everyone hears except those who have the choice to do things, the human beings and the jinn. اللهم أعط منفقا خلفا وأعط ممسكا تلفا. They would say, oh Allah, give munfiqan, the one that spends, khalafan, replacement for what he gave for the sake of Allah, and give mumsikan, the one that withholds, give him talafan. Talaf is when something is ruined. So the one that withholds his wealth, ruin his wealth. And the one that gives, give him more of what you gave him. And this is in the sadaqah, which is a very obvious thing, obvious in matters of ghaib, obvious in the certainty in the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is unseen. And the believers, they believe in this, and this is something that would never fail, which is the sign of a person dealing with the rizq, that when he gives for the sake of Allah, especially the zakah, he gives it with all kinds of goodness in his heart, that he sees the one that is taking the zakah is not less than him. He would see that it's a great ni'mah from Allah, great favor from Allah, that he has the ability to give the portion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it obligatory upon him. That's why it's called zakat. It's purifying one's wealth, purify one's heart. So, and that's why the ulama, they say, when someone gives his zakah, especially the zakah, right, never find in yourself that you have a struggle with it. The optional sadaqah, the shaitan won't leave the person, yes. Shaitan ya'dukum al-faqr, promise you poverty, this and that. Overcome the whispers of shaitan and give. But for the zakah, a person has to give it with ease, with being content. Why? Because the zakah money, it is not your money. If you don't, that means you're stealing somebody's money. And anyone with decency, he would hate that so much. How would someone with nice and sound fitra would allow himself to be a thief and have money that belongs to someone else? So he would not be at ease. So this is exactly what the zakah money is. It's not your money. If it's zakah money, it is not our money whatsoever. It belongs to someone else. Allah knows best who from the categories of the zakah. So therefore, he gives it with ease. Even if it's lots of money that he has to give in zakah, he's at ease with it. He's pleased that he's able to give his zakah. And of course, the optional acts of charity, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encouraged the believers. So we'll stop here, inshallah. We'll continue with more of these hadith. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who listen and benefit and be obedient to Allah. Inshallah, a few minutes we'll continue with dars, inshallah. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam, baraka Muhammad.